Welcome to our program, More Than a Seat at the Table, Why Meaningful and Equitable Representation Matters. America is a nation with historically stagnant representation. The status quo for government officials has traditionally been white men. However, the status quo is shifting in a profound way. Underrepresented communities are demanding a seat at the table, and over the course of the past few years, we have witnessed historic elections in our local, state, and federal governments. Today's program will examine this status quo disruption and explore the importance of meaningful and equitable representation. Joining me today for this very important conversation are outstanding individuals who have dedicated their talents to public service. These individuals all are uniquely disrupting the representation status quo. In some instances, creating the first seat at the table for groups of people who had traditionally been shut out. I'm very excited today to introduce to you our AllStar Faculty. First, I will introduce to you Kevin Olasaneya, who is the National Organizing and Political Director for the Collective PAC, a consortium of 4 organizations dedicated to recruiting, training, and funding and supporting Black candidates to run for office for local, state, and federal levels of government. Next, we have Mr. Kyle Stone. Mr. Stone is the elected prosecutor for Stark County, Ohio. He was elected in November 2020, and currently, Mr. Stone serves as Ohio's only Black elected prosecutor, and Mr. Stone received his JD from the University of Akron. Next, we have Mayor Amada Marquez Samolia, and Amada serves as the People of Columbia Heights, Minnesota's mayor. She serves as the second Latina mayor in Minnesota and as the city's first person of color elected to Columbia Heights, Minnesota's council. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Ashley Wilson. And Ms. Wilson is the legislative director and counsel for U.S. House of Representatives Majority Whip James E. Clyburn of South Carolina. Ms. Wilson served as an active leader in the ABA Young Lawyers Division, representing the South Carolina delegation, and is a 2011 graduate of Wake Forest University School of Law. I encourage you to check out the extensive bios of our esteemed faculty on our summit webpage. And at this time, I'd like to welcome our faculty. Thank you all for being here with us. We're so excited to have you. So with that, let's dig into our content. So I think first we should start off with a level set, why we're having this conversation today. So considering the foundation of this nation we all find ourselves in here today, why does it matter to have representation? Why is this a meaningful conversation? And Ashley, I think it's important with your job that you have, what you do every day. I'd like to start with you. What are your thoughts on this question?
So Tamara, thank you so much, one, for having me. Happy to be here with the ABA and this esteemed group of panelists. And I think this conversation is just so timely. You guys know a little bit about my background and my current role, but it was a transition for me out of private practice at a big law firm. So I've, in kind of my recent work experience, have been really thinking about this issue and thinking about how we can encourage people, especially smart, young, talented lawyers, to go into government service, and what it means for me and my background and everything I bring as a diverse lawyer, what that matters and why it's important. And so it's just such a great question. Glad to be on this program. But I think kind of for me, how I frame this issue is one, in our representative government, I want someone at the table who has experiences that are similar to me. And so when we go into spaces and we're having a seat at the table, with that seat, we bring all of our life experiences, the communities that we're a part of. And so I think sometimes we may kind of discount that as young professionals. And so I think it's just been really important for me now, kind of seeing how the sausage is made and going back into the world of government, how critical just sometimes my perspective might be to a conversation. I obviously work for a member, so he's kind of drives the train, but I can often bring my experiences and my thoughts and my perspective on issues to him, and then he's like, and it gives him a second thought. So I think, if we all as individuals thought about where we sit in our various kind of communities and our workplaces, then we know that we can always have an impact, even if we're not the top dog or the person calling all the shots. Like, our input really matters, and so I think that's a really critical reason why particularly diverse people should go into government service. So I hope that was an answer to your question, but I know these other guys might have something to chip in, but I think that was just critical for me.
Absolutely. I have a feeling the theme of knowing how the sausage is made is going to be prominent in this conversation today. Kyle, I'd like to turn to you. The pursuit of justice is an important conversation, and being a prosecutor, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, it's extremely important, especially in the criminal justice arena, to have a seat at the table, because it provides a cultural perspective that generally and historically has not been represented or presented. And so to understand family dynamics, to understand cultural backgrounds can provide, it may not absolve an individual from the responsibility of the actions that they've taken, but it provides context and it provides understanding that will allow the trier of fact or trier of the law, the jury and the judge, as well as the prosecutor, to understand the individuals just a little bit better, to be able to provide, what the ABA requires of the prosecutor. And that is not just a case processor, but create and implement programs that help people stay out of the system or keep them out of it, so that they don't, the recidivism factors are less, and their ability to reoffend are lessened. And so it's very important that there's individuals from diverse backgrounds with a seat at the table, because most of the decisions are made are at the table. And I am in a different position with being the head of the table here in Stark County. And it's great, but even me being the head of the table, I still need to make sure that my table that I'm at is diverse as well, not just with me and people of color, but just a general, diversified staff, so different perspectives are being presented so that we can effectively effectuate justice fairly and equitably.
Awesome. And you kind of teed up my next question that I'm going to kick to everyone here. And you mentioned context. So I'd like to turn to each of you all. You each represent different dynamics of civic engagement. Your paths are very rich in service to your communities. You represent different geographic locations. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on representation and what that means within your bubble of the world, civic engagement, geographic, and to you personally. So first, I'd like to start off with you, Amada. What are your thoughts?
So in Columbia Heights, we have a very diverse city. We're about just under 40% people of color. We have a lot of people from East Africa and Somalia. So we have more recent immigrants, I would say within 10, 15 years, as our population has grown. We have a very large Muslim community, and we have the largest Tibetan community in Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota. And so representation, I would love to see a way for immigrants to be able to be a part of our boards and commissions and city government sooner. And if we look back at United States history, it takes so long for everyone to be able to take those steps. But meanwhile, we're losing that rich perspective of being new to this country. And so I'm holding tonight actually I'm holding a meeting with the East African community, and somebody made a kind of a joke saying, well, I won't hold my breath that you're going to do this for the Irish who come here recently. And somebody really nicely said, you know what? My grandparents came from Ireland in the 1800s, and it would have been great if the mayor of New York City had reached out to those immigrants and had welcomed them to be a part of the community immediately, versus waiting for them to be able to blend in and to be palatable to the rest of the, predominantly white community. And I don't want to lose that. I want people to get involved, right now, because they have stuff to offer us, and we can learn from them and enrich our services in our community.
Fantastic. That's really cool. Best of luck with that event.
Thank you.
Kevin, your thoughts. What does representation look like in your bubble of the world?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Tamara, and it's great to be on with such a great group of panelists. I think when I think about this issue, I always go back to what I think government is supposed to be. And I think, I fundamentally believe government of, by, and for the people has to represent the people at the table, right? You can't have government that does that effectively if there is a segment of the population that's missing from that table. And so fundamentally, right, as we have big picture conversations about issues, right, immigration reform and, canceling student debt and all of these sort of major issues that are percolating in the national conversation, the reason representation is important is for the same reason that you want to have doctors involved in a conversation around healthcare. You want to make sure that you have diverse populations involved in conversations around government. And so part of what we have done at the collective really has been unabashedly strong in our advocacy to make sure that Black voices are represented at the table. And I'm grateful to be joined in that work by folks from the Latino community and folks from the AAPI community and from the LGBTQ community and from all kinds of other diverse backgrounds. I think it's so incredibly important that all of those voices are at the table when we make decisions about where we are going. And frankly, I think it's impossible for us to move forward if we don't have those voices represented at the table.
Awesome. Fantastic. Ashley, you want to share your thoughts on what your view from your bubble looks like?
Yeah, so I think representation kind of from my bubble and in my space looks like more congressional staffers that look like me, right? And more congressional staffers that represent what our country is starting to look like and its diversities and its different pockets and communities. And so for me, I think particularly in the young lawyer space, I think that requires young lawyers to think and be creative about what their career path looks like. Before I came here, I practiced law at a big law firm, and before that, I worked at the Attorney General's office. So I had a very traditional career path as a lawyer. I was like, okay, I work at a law firm. I'm going to be a partner, and I'm going to be old. And so the idea that I could come work for my congressman and help him was kind of totally outside of the realm, not even out of the realm of possibility, but outside of my purview as a possibility from a career standpoint. And so, but now that I do it, I just see so many opportunities for the skills that lawyers develop to be just really appreciated and just utilized heavily in the context of working for the government. And also, I live in Washington, D.C. And so my brother always teases me and says, here, you can throw a rock and hit a lawyer. And so just being really and creative about what we can do with our skills to find maybe a different seat at the table, and maybe thinking about that being the way that we contribute to our world based on our skills and just being in a different workplace. And I mean, a lot of people I know a lot of people that I work with now that have just really had just successful careers and had opportunity to really work on really cool and meaningful pieces of legislation and just initiatives that are lawyers. And so that kind of having that idea that there's like a whole nother room with a whole different table than what we're kind of either taught in law school or just how we kind of naturally progress in our careers is really a game changer for me. So what representation looks like to me is more diverse lawyers coming to work on Capitol Hill. So
Cool. Kyle, you're our anchor. Bring us home.
So here in Stark County, the minority population is about 10%. And in Ohio is a unique state. We've only had one other individual, the late Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones, who held the office of county prosecutor, and she was elected in 1990. So it has taken 30 years, right? 20 years, 30 years for us to get the second individual here in Ohio. And so we have a long way. I think we still got a long way to go. But what it looks like is more individuals standing up, being willing to say, I'm willing to do it. So my background, just quickly to bring some context to this, is I was in the insurance industry for many years and kind of compliance with, a city agency and whatnot. So when I went to law school, I've only been a practicing attorney. I just celebrated completing my 5th year of a member of the Ohio Bar. So the fact that I'm in this position in this office at 5 years is short of a miracle. And so my background, I've been a pastor, and I, grew up in the church, and for 14, 15 years, I was a staff pastor at a church and whatnot. And so just bringing that context, my background, and then I saw the need. I saw that there was a need for that seat at the table to be occupied by someone who really cared about the people, really cared about the community. And so then I said, well, hey, some changes need to be made. If nobody else is willing to stand up, I'm willing to just step out on faith and just go forward and see what happens. And this is where we're at right now. And so in this bubble, it's going to require more people willing to stand up to say, I'm willing, even if it looks like it's not winnable. I mean, I went up against a 17-year incumbent who was actually the law director of one of the cities in our county for 15 years before that. So 32 years in public service that I was going up against, and I had never ran for office before. And so we were able to be successful. And so for us to be able to move forward, we need more young people. We need Kevin's collaborative organization to come and help us work with some other individuals that are willing to stand up and say, and we're not talking about political parties, we're talking about people willing to stand up and say, this is what needs to be done. We need more individuals with a seat at the table. And no matter who we're going up against, if we believe strongly enough, let's make it happen. So that's what I believe needs to happen, at least here in Ohio and in Stark County. More younger and diverse individuals willing to stand up and take the reins over.
Amazing, which is the whole point of our summit. So you're speaking to our souls here today. So I'd like to talk about your perspectives, your all's perspective on some barriers to access. We've talked about, getting people in the ring, but what are some of the barriers to that call to action? So I want to talk about those both visible and invisible barriers, and you can share, kind of your, 50,000 foot view or some of those things that maybe you've all experienced. And Kevin, I'd be super interested in your perspective based on the work that you get to do, every day at the collective. So I'd kick it to you first on your thoughts here.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize or put a finer point on what Kyle was talking about, because I think it's so critically important, right? What we have seen around the country since the 2020 election cycle is a resurgence of younger and particularly people of color standing up and saying, you know what, I want to be that seat at the table. And what I have increasingly found is that the question comes up of, how do I do that, right? A lot of folks know what the problems are. They potentially have the solutions to those problems, but what they don't or can't figure out is, what is the pathway for me to get from where I am now to getting there? And so that really is the crux of the work that we do at the collective, is helping folks who raise their hand and say, I'm ready to do this. How do you raise the money that you need to raise to be able to run for office? How do you build a good team? How do you have a good message? How do you talk to folks about your background? How do you do the sort of blocking and tackling that you have to do in a political campaign to be able to get you over the threshold? And so, routinely, I am told the biggest and hardest hurdle for folks is trying to figure out how to raise money. It's not an easy thing to do. It's an acquired taste. I think most elected officials, Kyle, the mayor, can probably tell you it's the worst part of their job easily, is picking up the phone and asking somebody to support them financially. But it's an essential thing that has to be done. And so I think what matters is making sure that folks have the resources and to be able to figure out how to do all those things. And to Ashley's point, making sure that teams are diverse as well, right? So how do we make sure that there are people of color who are doing all of these roles, filling in the consultant space? They're serving as campaign managers and finance directors and digital directors and all that type of stuff. That is frankly the crux of the work that I do on a daily basis. It's actually the reason I jumped out of law practice, is because I felt like, no offense, but there's plenty of Black lawyers who can handle the government side. I don't see quite as many folks willing to do this kind of work. And so I think so critically important that we build that part of this up, because it's more than just having people say, I want to run for office. It's about creating an infrastructure around them to help them to be successful.
Absolutely. Great insight. Amada, you have such a rich history building up through community service and such a unique role from the perspective of our panel. What are your thoughts here?
Yes, I think encouraging younger people, especially people of color, and all of our diverseness, including the LGBTQ community, to run for office. But then I think when we've decided to step up into those roles, that we also are, even if we don't mean to, we're also saying that people can come to us for advice. And I think for all of us on this panel and people in the audience too, that, we have to do our part. And as we all know, as a person of color, you're always doing the work twice and not getting thanked for that second half. But I mean, encouraging people to run and saying, I'll be here with you. I'm going to give you my tricks that I learned. But then also finding, there's a lot of resources out there too. And so I think doing your homework, asking a lot of questions. There's, I read a really great book called Represent about women running for office. I worked with Women Winning. So there's a lot of organizations out there that can give you, those basic spreadsheets. What's a budget going to look like? What is your team going to look like? And just helping them realize if they're ready to run too, because maybe they're not quite ready. It is hard even when you get in the seat. So maybe their first role is finding someone else to help on their campaign. So it's not a don't do it. It's let's get you ready for success at all those levels. And like Ashley was saying too, like there's many ways to be involved and to be at the table. It might not just be the table you thought of initially, but you're still going to make some changes. So I think once we learn these things, we can help give those tricks out to people and help pull them on board so they can bloom and transform too.
Yeah, that's such an important perspective. Cal, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this being so close to your election. Were there any barriers that you found or your co-elected officials? What are your thoughts on this question?
So Kevin, one of the things that he said was funding and raising funds. He hit the nail on the head. for, when I first mentioned that I was going to run, my team, one of the ladies that's on my team has been in politics for a very, very long time, wealth of knowledge. And so she says, Kyle, you'll need at least $50,000 to run this countywide campaign. And I'm like, wow, not for sure where I'm gonna get that $50,000 from, but my first fundraiser was supposed to be, I believe it was April 1st. Well, COVID, the parameters for COVID came, I think it was March 18th, Governor DeWine put those in place. And so that limit, we couldn't have any fundraisers. And so it wasn't until August that I just started text messaging my friends and saying, hey, I need some money. And so all we raised, get this, y'all ready for this? $12,000. That's how much we raised. That's it. And so I bought 500 signs, and the rest I used for mailings, and that's all we had. And but funding is an issue, and then mentorship, because historically there hasn't been people at the table. It's hard to find somebody to help you get to the table, and so you have to almost forge your own pathway to get there. If you don't have the resources or the connections to have somebody that can help show you the ropes and how to do that. One also is a support network that at least they'll support you from a foundational standpoint to get you to that place. Luckily, I was working in a law practice as of counsel. I was running my practice out of that same office where the managing partner actually encouraged me to run and push me, to run and whatnot. And so, you got to have at least, not even necessarily financially, but mentally and emotionally, you need a group of individuals that are going to support you, knowing the task that comes. And now that I'm in this position, it's like I'm the solution for everybody. Like the woes of the Black community have been placed on my shoulders. And part of that is I expected it. And part of it is I can't carry that large of a load by myself. It requires other people. And so I think some of the barriers is financially support, emotional support, mental support, but then also cultural understanding, because some individuals felt like, and this was a message that somebody placed on my Facebook page, was prosecutor is a white man's job, because that should be something that white men put Black men in jail. Black men don't put other Black men in jail. And so that's a hurdle in this position that I had to get over to be able to provide understanding. This isn't about Black or white. This is somebody who broke the law, who has to face the consequences. And those who did not break the law, they are able and allowed to go free. And that's what I'm ensuring, is that what we're doing is being fair and being equitable. It's not about keeping people out of jail. It's about making sure innocent people don't go to jail, or that we're not overcharging individuals and over incarcerating individuals. That's why I'm in this seat, not so that I could send this person to jail or that person to jail, but it's almost like a gatekeeper to ensure that we're doing things equitably and fairly. And if it's not, I should be willing to call it out when I see it.
Absolutely. I want to touch on one barrier that I think each of you kind of wove in, and that's financial, but specifically student loan debt. So you may be aware that last year, the ABA Young Lawyers Division did a student loan debt report. And I want to read this here to make sure I don't misquote the awesome work that we did. But one of the key findings highlighted that there were systematic inequalities, and I don't think that'd be a surprise here to our panel. But within the legal education and student loan constructs, there were inequalities. And for instance, the finding was in regard to debt loads, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and multiracial law grads, as opposed to similarly situated white students, took on about $25,000 to $40,000 in more debt. So with that backdrop, How does student loan debt shape the opportunities for debt repayment and, government law jobs? And Ashley, I want to turn to you with, big law as your background, and then also with a government backdrop. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I think this is a critical barrier to a lot of different career paths and opportunities in the law. It's so interesting to me because when I went to law school, like I was just like, okay, law school costs that, I'll pay it one day, right? But now I have a lot of junior staffers in my office who are thinking about going to law school, and they're like, well, this law school costs this much, and this one has really good program, like repayment program, and I'm just like, first off, the generation following us is very much engaged in this conversation and looking at making choices, whether career-wise or as far as just even what their law school academics looks like based on cost. So that's just such a kind of creative and unique and just like so forward thinking. But I definitely think that student debt is a factor that prohibits people from going into government or just public service in general. But I think the way that I've always thought about this is that, you know, everybody wants to make a living, right? Everybody wants to make a fairly good living where they can feed their families, house themselves, maybe carve out a little bit of fun and find some joy in some other thing outside of work, right? So I think that the more conversations that we have like this one, where people see people that are in government service and are able to, I think we probably all live relatively okay lives. I mean, I think that that's the part of the conversation to encourage people to do it. I work for the House of Representatives, which we're considered like federal government employees, and they have a really generous student loan repayment process, and it's just great. I cannot take advantage of it right now. It's a long story, but they really, really do try to provide opportunities on that front for employees because they recognize that that's something that they're going to need to keep us around, right? And I think a lot of government agencies have programs like this. So I think sometimes when we look at the, maybe pay cut that we might be taking, we fail to look at other much broader benefits. I mean, I have like really great retirement contributions, their student loan repayment. And so I say all that to say that it's not like we can't discount the fact that not everybody is in a place of privilege to quit their job to run for office or take a pay cut to run for office or even just take time off to run for office, right? And I think like we can all agree on that probably at a base level, but it's still it's you can make it work. And so I'm always just like, ask someone who is doing what you think you might want to do. I know that's helped me a lot in my office. We have most of our senior staffers are lawyers. And it's always fun because they have pretty much done kind of legislative, like government work most of their careers. And so so they're like, oh, ask the real lawyer. And like, they're just like, why are you here? Like, what? So it's fun, but there are people doing it, right? So if you find something really interesting that is in the government sector that you think you might want to pursue, like just try to find someone that's already doing similar work. Or if you want to run for office, like go talk to, go talk to Kyle, go talk to Mayor Mata. I think that seeing, we always say, I think this is particularly the case in communities of color, like seeing someone do what you want to do just really makes you be like, oh, I can do that. And so that also gives a kind of, to piggyback on why it's critical that we have a seat at the table, like other people being able to see us and be like, oh, I can go work on Capitol Hill because like I saw Ashley, or I can go be, the head prosecutor because I saw Kyle. I can be mayor because I saw Amada. Like I think that's just such a like mind-blowing concept, which is why I think it's just so great to have these conversations. But it can be done. And I mean, it can be done sometimes on a lot less than you think. So I just am very encouraging, but also recognizing that like people want to make a living. Like that's what we went to law school for. I always kind of am tickled with my staffers who like have these grand life plans that don't at all require practicing law. And I'm like, you don't gotta be a lawyer to do that. And also think like practicing law is like, I enjoyed it. So I think everybody should try it. Right. But those are just my thoughts. I definitely think student debt is definitely a barrier. And, hopefully, we'll try to get something done in DC with regard to that. It's definitely a priority of Mr. Clyburn and President Biden. So
I hope so too. And I take from that, I should maybe come work from you or work with
come
you.
listen. We would love to have you. We would love to have you.
That's awesome. Well, I want to shift here and talk a little bit deeper into what our what our title implicates for this program, and that's meaningful and equitable representation. So with that, that's a disruption of the status quo. That's not what we traditionally see when we look at government. So what does that require when we're shifting culture and we're shifting what the workplace looks like? And Amada, I want to turn to you because that's a pretty big shift in Minnesota. So I kind of want to, ask, what are your thoughts? What are we demanding when culture has to shift, and what does that experience look like?
Yeah. So I'm just going to take it to like the super basic baby steps, because I think it's so important to realize that we are asking for a shift, a cultural shift. And most of humanity is that's not gonna work very well, right? You got to take these little steps to get there, because people have to be on board. I'm one vote of 5, and no matter how much I want a cultural shift, it just can't happen because people have to buy into it. But we also have to be ready for it. And one of the ways we can be ready for a cultural shift of working with diversity is to super basic, learn how to say people's names correctly. Pronouncing people's names correctly, where you can welcome them to be a colleague of yours, to work with you, work in the next office, have lunch with them, whatever. Those microaggressions of you are different than me and I don't have the time to meet you as respect you in the way that you deserve and we all deserve, I think sends a message. So if you're putting out there that your company, your office is going to be all, you're all about DEI and you're ready to go, but meanwhile, every time someone says, no, my name is Jorge, it's not George, and everyone's like, yeah, whatever, you know what I mean? Like your office is not ready for DEI. Like you got to go to those little steps and figure out how to welcome people where they're at. And the same thing with just, so I think like basically like being aware of those things, talking about them, because if you're not talking about it, you're not talking about it. And I think anti-racism, anti-bias training is huge. People have to know, and you can't just keep throwing out words like like white fragility if no one understands what you're saying, or if you throw out words like equity and people are like, oh, but I think equal and fair is the same thing. Like that's not the same thing. So everybody kind of has to go down to just some basics so that you can start to grow together and then get people to buy in how it will benefit your whole establishment.
Mayor Amada, I just think that's just so, it sounds so easy, but it's so hard.
So
and
hard. Yeah.
I've been kind of learning this in the land of a place where culture can shift every 4 years. So it's just, that's like so critical. And also just being willing to have conversations with people that are different from you, and being open to what their experiences and perspectives are. I think sometimes we live in a world where sometimes we get to see most publicly extremes. And so when we interact with people that we associate with a specific extreme, we're kind of like, oh, the crazy people. And then when you really talk to them, they're kind of like not exactly crazy, just a little misinformed, right? And so I just think that's so important. Just little things that we can do that are just things that humans do to just really kind of make sure we are really taking advantage and doing our best to share our perspectives when we're sitting at the table, but also being responsive and open to learning about other people. As a person whose name is Ashley, I think the name thing is critical, and I'm horrible about it. So I will say your name 20 times to remember. So that's a great tip.
Yeah, and one of those things too is like people doing your own homework. So when you go to YouTube and you say, I don't know how to say their name, there's you can just put on YouTube how to pronounce this person's name.
Yep.
You need to do your own homework. You don't need to wait for your manager or you to tell yourself, let's do a training. Like you can learn these things on your own, but if you're not willing to put the work in, we can't make these cultural shifts. And I think that about all of our diverse communities, we have to be ready to do the work. And as someone told me, speed and demanding that we do things quickly and correctly is a tool of white supremacy. And whenever we feel, those of us who are at the table, whenever we feel like, well, we want an answer quick, look into why do we want to do that quick, and what are we risking by pushing forward without knowing all the details. I think that brings me back, like, if I want it quick and easy, I'm just buying into the status quo, and this is going to be work, and that's just how it is. Thank you.
I think that's fantastic. And looking at how that the culture shift can be uncomfortable is a perfect tee up to my next question. So thank you all for making that easy for me. So I think with that, it's inevitable that there's going to be some discomfort, and it's inevitable that folks are going to have trouble navigating that. And, you know, I think frankly, folks are going to fall short of, you know, looking at DE&I and looking at, you know, things like insensitivity, lack of awareness, whether that's intentional or unintentional, right? And, you know, that all could be at play. So when we're having these conversations, I'd be interested in having you all follow up, you know, either the two of you, and I'd like to kick it over to you specifically, Kevin. You know, how do we engage in that when we're looking at making big strides with cultural shifts, or, you know, back to Amada's point of small strides. So how do we address that when we're trying to make those shifts and we're engaging with folks who are falling short there?
Yeah, I think the mayor's totally right about the speed of progress, right? I think we've gotten to a place, culturally speaking, where we want everything really fast. And lasting progress takes time, because culture shift takes time, right? You can't change hearts and minds overnight, right? So you got to be in it for the long haul. And so I think part of what we have to do is temper expectations. I think we should under promise and over deliver, right? And I think that the way to do that is to take the slow and steady approach that the mayor was talking about. I fundamentally believe that the true mark of progress is not whether a door swings open, but it's about how many people walk through that same door after the door opens, right? It's not so great that Kyle is the one Black prosecutor, right, elected in the state of Ohio, but it's been 30 years since the last time that happened, right? And so to me, like, we measure progress based on that, right? And I think let's do that at the micro level. Let's also do it, you know, at the macro level. The other thing that comes to mind here, which is sort of related, is as we have more diverse people at the table, we need to empower them to have a strong voice at the table. So I don't think it's enough to ask people of diverse backgrounds to just be in the room where it happens. They need to be at the seat at the table where the decision is being made, and empowered to have their voice heard at that table. And to me, it's not enough to open the door and let me in the room while a bunch of other folks that don't look like me are making the decision, right? Like, to me, that's not progress. So all of these things are cultural. It requires people to be purposeful and deliberate about what they are doing, because it doesn't happen overnight. It requires people like the panelists that are here and folks that are sort of gatekeepers, if you will, to be mindful of what they're doing, how they're doing it. My dad used to tell me sometimes the only Bible that anybody will ever read is you, right? And so we can say a lot of things about what we should and shouldn't be doing, but I think people who are in positions of power should be modeling good behavior. And I think that by modeling that good behavior, we'll make these strides overnight. But I think people should, I get the frustration about things not moving fast enough, but in our culture, we need to understand that change takes time, that, Rome wasn't built overnight, and that if we just keep pounding away at this stuff, we'll eventually get there.
Absolutely.
Can I add one little thing to that?
Oh, yes, please feel free.
Culture shifts take time, but I also think because I'm a first ring suburb of Minneapolis. So we're George Floyd, you know, we just had his anniversary. And then Dante Wright is like the next suburb over, Philando Castile is the next suburb over. And there are some things that we do need to do quickly, you know, where there's wrongs. And so I just want to make sure those are two distinct things, that we can't wait around on cultural shifts for when there are some things that we know are wrong and they need to be changed in their laws and policies. But the cultural shift of empowering people and learning what we need to do to provide different services for our whole communities, that's going to take a while, because we need to learn how to ask questions and then get people at those seats at the table. So just wanted to kind of, I know we're all on that same page, but I don't want to give a message of like everything needs to move slow, because some things we need quick change.
Completely agree, and thank you for putting the emphasis on that point.
So that segues nicely into, you know, I know my law school dean always says we're planting trees, not flowers. And I think that ties nicely into what you all are saying is, you know, it's slow, but we're investing in our future. So I want to talk about the next generation of lawyers being young lawyers. So we have a unique position in our community and our profession. We're a bridge between the future and the past. So how can young lawyers use our unique skills, our talents, our passion to disrupt the representation gap? Kevin, to your point, you know, to be through the door, to keep funneling representation, to make sure those seats are filled and we're keep pulling chairs up to the table. So I want to first turn to our young lawyers, and Ashley, I'd start with you.
That's a really easy thing for us to do. And it's just like, leave the ladder for somebody behind you. I think that I'm just a person that's always open to talking to young lawyers, to law students, because that's what someone did for me. You know, I've always told people I'm an advocate of the free lunch club. I'm like an alumni. You know, when you're like a poor law student and you meet a nice lawyer and they take you to lunch. And so I'm an alumni and participant in that. But I think it's just sometimes as younger professionals, we discount the breadth of our knowledge and experiences. And so because we're kind of in the grind and the hustle of trying to figure out where we're going to make an impact or starting in our career and kind of gaining some momentum, we forget that we've gone through different trials and things that others younger than us may be experiencing or about to experience. And so just always being willing to share those things. And you know, I just think of so many ways that we can give back to the generation behind us beyond having these conversations. You know, if you see a spark in someone that you're like, I'm not really good at this because I think all my friends are amazing, but I have so many young lawyer friends. And I'm like, you should run for office. Like, go read this book, go follow, you know. So like when you see particular like really great skills in people that you think would be just perfect in public service, like just like put the idea, plant the idea in someone's head, you know, because sometimes people don't see their own greatness or see things for themselves that others can very clearly see, right? So I really am an advocate of that, and also just talking to the next generation and letting them know about what experience you have, and I think that's the greatest way. And then I mean, it can be even more deliberate. You know, if you see opportunities, share it with the person of color, share it with the professional that you think would really benefit from it. I mean, if you get a new job, I mean, I think this is still the case, but a lot of times when we get new jobs and we get advancement, there's an opportunity there for us to bring in someone, and us giving somebody a green light to our employers is always so something as simple as when you're leaving an opportunity to do something else in public service or otherwise, just sending out, telling everybody that they're looking for people and that they'd love to have someone that look like you. You know, there's so many little things that we can do to make sure that at least even when we leave different tables, that there's someone that's replaced there that at least, you know, might share our perspective. So I think there's just so many creative ways we can do that are easy and kind of hopefully organic. But that's, I mean, I think the next generation just has so much at its disposal and I think every generation has more greater than the generation before. So just exciting to see how they'll make an impact and what that'll look like. So.
Fantastic. Kyle, I'd like your thoughts as well.
One of the things that, you know, over the past 6 months or 5 months that I've been going out speaking at some of the local universities and whatnot, I've been sharing that influence and participation is no longer enough. There has to be infiltration. And so they have to be willing to go forward. And I think it's important for individuals to be committed, or not say committed, but be true to your culture. Don't try to minimize who you are just to assimilate or fit in, but just be true to who you are, so that who we see in the hustle and bustle is the same person we see once you get to the table, because we can trust that once you get to the table, you're going to do what you said you were going to do before you got there. And so I believe that to be very, very important. And so I always also tell individuals, be committed to the people, especially if you're going to serve in the public sector. Be committed to the people. When the work no longer is about the people, we've started on the downward spiral that it no longer is a public servant. You're just serving yourself. And so you have to be committed. And so I'm a fan of mentoring. I'm a fan of, if you want some advice, set up a meeting. I'll sit and have lunch with you, have a conversation with you, because I believe that it's important. And I want to be the door stopper. I want to be the one that opens the door and stands at the door and keeps it open to ensure that no one closes it. And to Kevin's point, it's absolutely absurd that, and most people don't even realize that we only have one elected prosecutor that's African-American or a minority in Ohio, but that it was 30 years in between the time. And so for us individuals, and let me just say this too, this panel has just been just amazing. Like, I just sitting here listening, talking to y'all is just like giving me life today. So I really appreciate it. But it's just like, we got to be willing to, like you said, pull up people from the ladder, like Ashley said, just be willing to go further. I can't go up and not take anybody with me. That means that I have not done what my God-given responsibility has been. And we have to be willing to go further. And I think it's necessary, if we're going to continue to move, if we're going to allow that cultural shift to take place, there has to be other individuals that we take with us and that we're willing to build them up. They may have some deficiencies in certain areas, some weaknesses in certain areas that we might be able to help them cover and get better at. We just got to be willing, and they aren't going to be the perfect individual. Let's get that out the way. They may not have all of the look. They may not have the list of degrees or experience, but we just have to be willing. If they have a passion in their heart to serve, a true passion to serve and to do right, we ought to be willing to extend a helping hand, to say, I'm willing to help you so that I can help you raise your hand to volunteer to be the one to sit at the table next.
Absolutely. So I want to end here kind of on a call of action. All of you have a dedication to serve, to bring other folks to the table and to serve the community. And you're in the trenches, and some of you all have been the first through the door. Some of you are the ones pushing folks through the door. And I think that is so profound and so, just amazing to watch. I'm in awe of what you do every day. And some folks in our audience and those who may view it later, who want to follow in your footsteps, may not know where to start and may not feel that there's a place for them at the table, especially for someone who looks like them. I think of myself from South Dakota. There aren't people who look like me at the table. So how would you encourage them to take that step to, walk towards the door, and especially, looking at public service? How would you encourage them to serve and to fulfill that passion, to take your words, Kyle, to raise their hand? And I'd first like to turn to you, Amada. What are your thoughts?
So I would say, one, don't wait for an invitation. I have learned during campaigning that white men run for office and people of color and women have to be asked to run for office. So we don't have to do that, but that's kind of generally what's happening because we want to make sure what the community wants us. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So anyway, you don't have to do that. I'm giving you permission. to go for it. Also, feel free to contact me. I would be happy to just go over different ideas of where you can go. Sounds like some really great resources here, so I'm available. And yeah, to kind of Ashley had mentioned it, like find someone who's doing something that you want to do, and say, hey, I'd like to do this. Do you have any tips? And if they say no, or they say I don't have time to talk to you, find the next person and ask them. Somebody is going to want to help you, and you just got to keep asking. Ask me, or if you want to ask someone else, but someone will be there to help you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to kick it to the last three, the lightning round. We're running short on time. So Kevin, you're first up in the lightning round. What are your thoughts?
I think the answer fundamentally are two things. The first is you need to know that you're enough, that you don't have to go out and be something else, that if you're willing to put in the work and show up, that there's more than enough of a community to support you. I think so often people think that there's some sort of a picture of what public service looks like. And the reality is that the most effective public servants are the ones who showed up, identified a problem, and realized that they were the solution to the problem, rather than looking for somebody else to do it. So I think that that's, the first thing. I'd say the second thing, probably even more important than that, is just being willing to sacrifice and do it for free, potentially. A lot of us that have done this work have interned for somebody, probably didn't get paid for it, and did the grunt work. I am a real believer in kind of getting your hands dirty and learning the trade for nothing, making the mistakes on somebody else's dime before you have to go out and do it on your own. And I think being willing to make those sacrifices in this space is super important, and pays dividends in the long run.
Awesome. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
Super quick, just always be reminded that choices you make in your life are yours, and just take responsibility for your life. I like to think about it as everything in my life, for the most part, I've chosen it. So that means if I ever want to change it, it's on me. You can always change your life. You can always make a different decision. You can always get a new job. I always tell people that when they're job hunting. I'm like, you know what? If you hate this one, find a new one. And that's the fun of it, right? That's just take responsibility for yourself and what you want your life to look like. And if it looks a little different than the average person's life, that's okay, because as long as you chose it. So.
And Kyle, you were our anchor before, so bring us home again.
So real quickly as well, just be you. Just like everyone, I echo the comments made by our co-panelists. Just be you, and just be willing to celebrate you. I hear the word, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And so be happy with people who celebrate who you are. Don't try to assimilate to fit the parameters of what you believe or perceive that people want you to fit in. And like the mayor said, you don't have to ask permission, just do it. You don't owe that to anybody but yourself, is to make sure you're okay with taking that next step and being okay with what comes with that next step, what comes with the campaign, what comes with running for office, or what just comes with being a public servant. So just be you.
Wow, what an amazing program. As we close, I'd like to thank our faculty. I am just in awe of who you all are and what you do every day. Thank you for being you, and thank you for being inspiring. I'd like to thank our attendees for tuning in, spread the word, encourage folks to access our recording of the program. I hope you all leave here feeling encouraged, feeling empowered to be you, to claim your seat at the table and pull up a chair for the person who comes after you. So thank you for attending, and we'll hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you, Tamara.